Hi everybody! Today we will finally tackle the wiring of the bike. Well, I have actually already made a wiring. It's done. So this video will be a bit different from what we are used to around here. Instead of just showing you 15 minutes of footage of me crimping and cutting and soldering cables, I thought I would walk you through what I have done, tell you a little bit about why I did it like that, and of course also show you how I did it. I started off by labeling all the connectors on the bike and then proceeded to pull the whole cable harness off the bike. I already knew that I wanted to remove some of the components from the stock wiring. The things I wanted to remove were the clutch lever switch, just to be able to start the bike without having to pull in the clutch. Side stand switch together with its relay and its diode. I don't think it's a bad idea to keep these things on the bike, but I just wanted to get rid of as many of these big components as possible, and since it's not really needed, I decided to drop them. I also wanted to remove the decompression solenoid and the decompression controller. They're just too bulky and I will use a manual decompression lever instead. Lastly, I dropped the engine stop switch because I used the key for that. I started pulling all those things out of the cable harness and hooked it back up. Adding all the correct connectors in the right places. And I actually had everything working. Everything was just great. Until it became time to route the cables. I think using the stock cable harness would have been a great idea if I hadn't decided to move pretty much every component of the bike. The battery, the igniter, the turn signal relay, everything has a new home. So the stock wires were either too long or too short, or they had to be routed in very strange ways. I really tried to make it work. I even removed the rear fender to be able to route the cables underneath this bracket here. But the more I fought the stock cable harness, the quicker I realized that this will never work. And even if I got it working, the result would be an absolute dog's dinner and it would be a nightmare to troubleshoot. So I went back to the drawing board and came up with an all-new wiring diagram. Ordered some more connectors, crimped a few more wires, and finally ended up with this. The basic idea for this wiring is to have two main wires, I guess you could call them main lines, running the full length of the bike. One for power and one for ground. The power wire starts here at the ignition switch and then goes all the way to the front and also all the way to the back. The ground wire starts here at the battery and then goes all the way to the front. Then every component along the way that needs either power or ground can just splice into those main lines. I know that some of you might be screaming at your screens right now. Use a fuse block or at least a bus bar, you bloody savage! I did consider that, but all the fuse blocks I found were either cheap looking or way too expensive. And I even considered making my own bus bars, but when this bike came from the factory, it only had two fuses. And one of those were for the decompression, and since we got rid of that, that left us with only one fuse for the whole bike. So a fuse block would be overkill. And regarding splices, the factory harness is filled with splices and it has held up for almost 30 years. And if it's good enough for the factory, it's good enough for my garage. Anyhow, back to the wiring. I thought I would start at the back and run through the wiring all the way to the front. We'll start here by the battery. If you've been following along this project, you might notice something a bit different right here. The electronics tray I did a while back, it has been replaced by these two components. Let's just have a quick look on how I made them. Now the battery sits much safer and the igniter takes up less space. The turn signal relay is moved to the front of the bike and the little fuse box is replaced with this mini inline fuse holder. Much neater in my opinion. Moving on to the starter relay, nothing has changed, just some cables being replaced for longer ones. This right here is the new ignition switch. It doesn't have that useless parking light setting that I always somehow manage to activate. Instead it has a spring return so I can start the bike just like a car. That rendered the start switch in the front obsolete, so that will be removed. I'm mounting the ignition switch to a plate that I just welded to the frame. This is where the front brake switch connects with the rear brake switch and then goes directly back to the rear light. Speaking of the rear light, it's really simple, it's just a connector on the fender. Moving on, this will be the new location of the turn signal relay. It just made more sense to have it up front since most of the turn signal action is happening there. These are just some connections for the Speedo, the handlebar controls and the headlight. Regarding the headlight, instead of having one switch to turn it off and on, and another one for high and low beam, I decided to combine those into one switch. Down is low beam, middle is off, and up is high beam. I then put that switch on the back of the headlight housing, and that resulted in quite a few less wires having to run back and forth on the bike. All these changes actually rendered all the switches on the Speedo obsolete. So I guess the Speedo holder will have to return to its original state once again. To wrap it all up, no pun intended, I wrapped all the visible wires in these woven nylon covers, just to protect them and make them a little bit neater looking. The hidden cables I wrapped in cable tape just to keep them in place and to keep them protected. And that's all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video even though the format was a bit different. And if you want to tackle this job yourself, I will leave some links down in the description to some of the stuff I've been using. And if you want to follow along on this build, you are always welcome to subscribe. And if you like to remove safety systems from your bike just to look cool, maybe leave a like as well. Thank you for watching and I see you later. Bye!